Episode 171, Regen in the Field and Teaching the Future. This is the World Organic News for the week ending 3rd of June 2019. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Our first piece comes from the website inc.com, that's inc.com, entitled The Biggest Little Farm, How One Couple Gave Up Everything to Live the Entrepreneurial Dream. Quote, in The Biggest Little Farm, filmmaker-entrepreneur John Chester captures the improbable story of how he and his wife Molly built a 200-acre farm with a singular goal, achieving the highest level of biodiversity possible. A fascinating case study in regenerative agriculture, a type of organic farming that continually enriches soil and can help reduce climate change by sequestering carbon. The story of Apricot Lane Farm is also an inside look at the highs and extreme lows of putting everything on the line to chase after an ambitious entrepreneurial dream. And from further in the piece, just reawakening the soil and building a soil system that actually regenerates itself is a feat unto itself, John Chester tells Inc. To try to make the crops and the livestock interact in a way that is healthy for all is a level of complexity that, had we known in the beginning, I probably would have steered clear of, end quote. This is instructive. These people dive straight into an 80-hectare/200-acre farm with no experience but clearly some theoretical understanding. They're talking about regen and biodiversity after all. The problem most people face is the need to do so many things they think, and without experiencing prioritising them can be overwhelming. It takes at least 12 months for a piece of land to start revealing its secrets. Throwing money at a perceived problem can have unintended consequences. So where would I start? Well, with well less than 200 acres at first. But because I have some experience, I could probably play with 200 and that'd be okay. I'd start with soil tests so that I had at least an understanding of the pH. The plants already growing on the place would give some hint of that too. Then I'd make the fencing, the boundary fencing at least, secure. Internal fencing can be tested with electric options until you feel the need to make them permanent, if ever. Knowing your soil and having your fences secure means stock. The best way to improve soil is to move animals across it. Parallel to these actions, I'd plant a vegetable garden nearby the house and look at any legacy fruit trees. Planting a garden would allow me to feel the soil, and I can't put this into words. Touching the soil, which I would argue, and have, should always be covered, can still occur on rare occasions. This somewhat is the process that was followed, but it's important to actually get your hands on the soil and feel what it's doing. The life in it, or lack thereof, will be given away by the feelings in your hands. Another quote from the piece, quote, at the end of its second year, Apricot Lane Farms was home to 10,000 orchard trees, more than 200 different crops and a wide variety of animals. One of the farm's first products, eggs, eventually became so popular that 50 dozen packages would sell out at farmers' markets in less than an hour. John attributes the quality of the product to Apricot Lane's increasingly rich soil. The pastures that the chickens are eating off are fortified with a more complex, high-density nutrient that now is being transferred to the egg, he tells Inc. End quote. The thing to realise is that soil repair takes time but is immensely rewarding. Be it on 200 acres or a suburban backyard. I can remember an apple at a bus stop. Bear with me. It sat on the grass for 2 weeks at the bus stop before there was any sign of decay. It browned but did not wither or sprout mould or anything like that. Not even the ants seemed interested in it. I assume it was removed eventually by a rainfall event we had just had and disappeared down the stormwater system. I was 23 or so at the time, and way back then, the thing that struck me was the grass cover but no apparent soil microbes to deal with the apple. A lack of grazing animals is not unusual in a city. The use of animals by people in our piece would have skyrocketed the soil biology, but that's a matter of priority. The Chesters had other issues as they rebalanced their particular part of the ecosystem. After 10 years, though, the project is in a state of dynamic balance. I would recommend a full reading of this piece. It is full of traps for young players and good news story in the end. Our next story is another one of hope. From the ABC in Australia comes a story entitled Regenerative Agriculture for Students Launched in Australian First Curriculum to Maintain Healthy Soils. Quote, a Tamworth teacher has developed the first curriculum in Australia that explores regenerative agricultural principles and practices. Kate Spry created The Soil Story, The Road to Regenerative Agriculture, in response to a growing frustration over what she saw as misinformation about the role of agriculture in repairing soil erosion and combating climate change. End quote. This is really a good thing. I remember certain teachers who awoke my understandings of ecology and environmentalism and agriculture. Though to be fair to them, it was probably just the first two they had awoken. The agriculture thing has been with me since birth. When my first sister was being born, I wanted a goat. I'm glad I ended up with the sister instead. So the article is good. The teacher, Kate, was surprised by an inaccuracy in the science curriculum, and that was her starting point. Quote, I was teaching science, and there was an extract in the curriculum that said if we reduce our cattle numbers, we would deal with the methane's emissions issue, she said. End quote. We've covered this before. The correct statement is, if we reduce the numbers of cattle kept in feedlots, we would deal with a part of the methane problem. The amount of methane cattle produced in these industrial systems is horrific, but will pale somewhat if the methane held in the Arctic tundra is released. That's where the possibility of a nasty feedback loop lurks. Back to the article. Quote, Rebecca Smith has been teaching regenerative agriculture for more than 15 years in Armidale, which is about an hour and a half from Tamworth, where many of her students come from conventional farming backgrounds. While she anticipates a certain scepticism at the outset, Ms. Smith said it was her duty as an educator to show there is another way to manage the land. We still do lots of other things, learning how to drive a tractor and handle sheep and all that. But when it comes to land management, I use regenerative agriculture as my focus. The beauty of this new resource is that it puts these concepts in terms that are so simple and so on the mark. It just took someone as talented as Kate to put it all together. End quote. The word spreads. We have practical examples and teaching resources. The world of regen is growing. The existential doubts I expressed a few episodes back are banished. Hope has returned. The way forward is now visible. We can, as a species, fix the mess we've made. Until the political will catches up with the will of the people, we can just spread the word, one farm, one field, one garden at a time. And there is still time, so let's get this implemented. And on that note, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. Podcasting checklists are still available over at John Moore Podcasting Services if you're thinking about starting your own podcast and need a bit of a boot up the bum. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.